through in terms of speed and everything else. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. All right. Well, let's see. What time are we at? 12:01. I am going to get us started, and I know people will be joining as we go along, but welcome everybody who's on the call. I should even take a peek and see who's joining us today. See if I know anybody. Oh, hi, Grant and Amy and Lynn and Chris, Joanne, other Lynn. Oh, it's great to see all of you. Thanks for joining us. This is going to be a great conversation. And as I say to everybody, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Glain, Roberts-McCabe. I'm the founder of the Roundtable, and I'm really thrilled that I'm joined today by my friend Naomi, who is an absolute workplace expert. And so we were just talking before you guys joined about Clubhouse, and I was saying that I got really into Clubhouse when it started. And those of you not familiar with Clubhouse, it's basically what it sounds like, a clubhouse where people can, join and chit chat with each other on various topics. I'm like, you know what? Ask the Expert was Clubhouse before Clubhouse, because really what we're going to do here is I've got some questions for Naomi to get us started, but really, you guys, it's whatever you want to know about. So you can throw them in the chat as we start going along here. What's burning? What are you thinking about? Here's our chance to really, I hate the word pick the brains because it sounds like I'm a vulture and you're a carcass, Naomi, but tap the wisdom of those of us who sit in this world and think about this stuff all the time, right? So just as a reminder, we're going to have the lines muted, and we are going to, as I said, put things in the chat. So Kenzie, if you want to get rid of the slideshow, we will get the show on the road. Awesome. All right. So, Naomi, why don't you, just to set the stage, talk to us about how you ended up here? Where, like, when you were a little girl, where you're like, one day I'm going to be this HR workplace consultant. What kind of landed you to where you are now?
Totally. Thanks. It's so great to be here. And thank you everyone for joining. So to make a very long story a little bit shorter, grew up in Montreal. I was at McGill, really loved this kind of organizational behavior stuff. But as I graduated, this new IT learning thing was becoming a thing. So I went to Deloitte and I actually started out in enterprise risk services, which focused on kind of the operations and tech behind audits, which sounds really up the HR alley, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, my eyes are already glazing over. Okay.
But while I was in business school, I decided, nope, you know what? My passion is really in the people side of the business. And so I went back to Deloitte, but this time in their human capital practice. My next chapter of my career, I decided I don't want to be on the road anymore. I don't want to kind of do the round the world consulting thing. And I went internal at American Express. I was in HR for 7 years there, most recently as the head of HR for Canada. And then 4 years ago, I took the leap and I went out on my own, combining those two kind of chapters of my life, becoming a consultant advisor for HR and talent advisory, and focused specifically on this thing that was emerging called the future of work. So that's where I kind of really discovered my passion for the future of work. And so my business Collaborativity is focused on talent advisory around the future of work, new world of work, new world of work, next new normal, hybrid 3.0, kind of the evolution of that. I also have a business with a partner called Future Forward, which is really designed to bringing all the latest content, thought leadership, cutting edge stuff to the HR community, including through our partnership with Josh Bersin Academy. So that's kind of my road from tech geek and enterprise risk services all the way through to hybrid workplace 3.0.
Yeah, awesome. And you're really deep in this. And so we're really lucky today that we've got you here with us. And I know in the pre-call, one of the things that we were talking about, like what I've been observing anyway, is that we all know that work wasn't working the way it was working before the pandemic, like too many hours, big commutes, ridiculous meetings. Like we had all these issues before the pandemic. Then we had the pandemic, and I think people have, it's debunked some of the myths I think a lot of, especially maybe old school senior leaders, had about people not being productive at home, and some of those things. And a lot of people are finding, like, hey, I'm enjoying not having a 2-hour commute every day. And so we're kind of in this, I feel like we're in this kind of middle bubble And what I'm seeing a lot of organizations struggling with, though, is this idea of 3.0. I mean, we talked about this being workplace. If 1.0 was pre-pandemic, 2.0 is in the middle of the pandemic, what's 3.0 going to look like? What do you think it's going to look like? What should we expect?
So 3.0 is all about enabling workers to get their work done most effectively and efficiently from wherever that makes sense and whenever that makes sense,
Mm,
ideally, right?
yeah.
And I know we're going to talk about mindset a little bit later on, which is a critical component, the component of it. You can have
Yeah.
whatever bells and whistles, technology, policies you want. If leaders and people are not embracing, then it's dead, right? Which is kind of what happened in 1.0, right? We
Mm,
had all these amazing technologies, and there was constant questioning about why isn't productivity getting exponentially better. In fact, I think it was kind of petering out, right?
yeah.
So we were in 1.0, we had all these bells and whistles, we had all this technology, but we weren't really embracing the power of technology and how it can enable talent to get their work done more efficiently. It was kind of
Mm.
like a shiny object. Oh, the robots are coming. We're scared they're going to take our jobs. So we're going to not trust the robots and we're going to double check everything they do, kind of situation. Then the pandemic hit. And like you said, we had no choice. We
Mhm.
had to go digital. We had to move fast. We proved to ourselves that we could be agile. We could be digitally savvy.
Mhm.
But the issue is that we weren't optimizing for an ultimate employee experience that would actually enable people to get the work done most effectively and efficiently. We were really focused on taking analog processes and putting them online because we had no choice.
Yeah.
And so now the next evolution now is really the window that's closing that says, how can we capitalize on the learnings that we've had to date? And we've been saying this for now almost a year, right?
Yeah.
How can we capitalize on these learnings and build a workplace that is conducive and enables people to be at their very best and thrive? And if that means for me that I work from home with my digital tools every single day and I produce my results and I'm fine with collaborating this way, then great. If
Mhm.
there's a hybrid for me that makes better sense, great. If there's a meeting that must be done in person, then great, let's all meet in person. So it's really about thinking from a design thinking perspective, from a user-centric perspective. What will make this team, this person, this work most efficient and most effective?
Yeah, which sounds fantastic, but immediately my little voice is coming up going, yeah, but how do you do that, right? And so like what do you what are some of the biggest challenges and adaptations that organizations are going to have to make in order to start to move towards it's almost like a custom model of employment.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was a lot of talk around hyper personalization of experiences before
Mm,
this. But what really does that mean?
mhm.
Mindset is by far the number one barrier and
Yeah.
challenge, right? Because
Mhm.
there's so much subjectivity in what it means to get the work done most effectively and efficiently,
Yeah.
right? And you could have any metrics you want. At the end of the day, there will be some leaders that say there's no problem in getting this done completely remotely, and
Mhm.
some leaders that will say, no, there's no chance that we can get this done unless we are all in the office 24/7,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that is the number one challenge. Like I said, throwing any technology at this problem is not going to solve the problem. We saw that in 1.0. And we just need to go in very eyes wide open that there are still a lot of people who are chomping at the bit to get back to business as usual, right? And there are some companies that have rushed it and have gone back to business as usual.
Mhm. Mhm.
So really knowing that anybody you encounter may be a resistor to this way of working is really critical. And really, again, peeling back to why you think that this can't get done in a different way, and having those real conversations. It's not always a rational conversation. A lot of the time, it's an emotional conversation. It's a conversation based on experience, based on one bad experience that a leader had, that so
Yeah.
and so didn't get their work done because they were off doing laundry and walking their dog instead of doing work, right?
Yeah.
And in our last meeting together, Glain, we talked about, results orientation and the fact that those results have to be the number one goal and not where you get work done. At the end of the day, it's hard. It's hard management and it's hard leadership to make sure that you manage and lead towards those results.
You know what you're making me think of is just really the model that we had for what was an effective leader is very grounded in that industrial revolution, right? It's this very sort of even though we say we don't want command and control anymore and we've got to move away from that, we're still kind of steeped, we're still steeped in that, right? Like our models are still based on like org chart hierarchy and decision-making hierarchies and all of these kinds of things. So, you know, the leaders that you've worked with, I mean, what would you say? Because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, yeah, that is it. And we have our biases and preferences of how we like to work. And then we inflict those on other people, right? As leaders. And so if you were to, and I'm kind of throwing this one out at you, but like when you think about what does it, what, you know, what is leadership? What are going to be the qualities of this next generation of leader? Because I think that's what we're looking at here, is that we're going to have to say leaders need to show up differently.
Yeah.
And what are some of the qualities that you think we need to be looking for in leaders to lead in a hybrid 3.0 world of work?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've all been grappling with since the beginning of this pandemic, right? Very seasoned leaders who are very, very effective in our 1.0 way of
Yeah,
working, all of a sudden are deer caught in the headlights because they
yeah,
just don't know where to lean into in this, right? So I think all developed kind of these empathy skills and vulnerability and all that stuff because we've had no choice, right? You can see people's kids, you don't have control over your technology all the time. You've seen people's mental state go up and down, right? So those things are things that we can't unsee. Now, hopefully people take those with us into the new world of work.
mm,
And really, if you think about it, I mean, teams are collections of people and people are very unique and different. So if you're leading in a way that is supposed to be everything to everyone, and I am stoic and I am your leader and I have all the answers, that's really not going to hit the mark with teams of people.
mm,
So I think we have learned that through this pandemic, that
yeah,
people are people, and generally people want to do good work and they
yes,
want to feel like they're driving impact and they want to feel like they have control. And Glain, you and I were talking about, you know, this loss of freedom is so deeply
mm,
important at a subconscious level in a lot of cases.
yeah,
And once we go back to a state where yes, you can work from home, but you have the freedom to leave your home and you have the freedom to go to an office if that's the way you work best.
yeah,
I think it's really critical to capitalize on some of those learnings and make sure that we don't go back to, oh, this worked better last time. It worked better last time because we've been living through a pandemic and we've been forced to stay in our house,
yeah,
right? So it's
yeah.
really important to think a little bit more broadly about that.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, I think that's so true. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm seeing that's really interesting right now with our programs, because we obviously took all of our programs virtually as soon as the pandemic started. And it's funny because we have one client right now and they are engineers. Like these are very typical engineer, you know, a lot of introverts. And the dominant feedback that we're getting from our program is they love the program. They wish it was in person. And I was kind of laughing about it because I thought, I wonder if we were running this, you know, in still virtually, but in a non-pandemic COVID time, if we would still get that kind of feedback. I think what's happening now is that we're all extremely starved for connection. We're social beings, right? We are social beings. And I think um, what I'm hearing from so many of our clients is it's not that they don't want to go back in the office, but they want that freedom of choice that you're
Yes.
talking about. It's
Yeah.
like, I want to have freedom to determine where and when I need to be and what's going to allow me to do the best work.
Yeah.
I
That's
think it's a
absolutely.
different mindset, right? And yet I feel like organizations kind of tend to go all or nothing, right? In their
Mhm.
thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also been asked a lot about policies, right? Everyone wants a
Mhm.
policy. Everyone wants it
Yeah.
written down on a piece of paper that HR is responsible for abiding by and governing. And that's not the answer to flexibility. That is the
Yeah.
antithesis of flexibility, right? So
Yeah.
if you build the guardrails and you build the norms, right? So I even had this challenge before the pandemic. I had a team and there was a town hall meeting that you could not access unless you were in the office.
Mm,
And people didn't show up because we were new to this hybrid world of
right.
working. So
Right.
sometimes you need to lean in a little bit more as a leader and say, hey guys, next time when there's something that can't be accessed from anywhere else but the office, we have to agree to all come to the office to be
Yes.
together to see it, right? So sometimes at the beginning, it does take a little bit more hand-holding. It's like
Yes.
situational leadership. It takes a little
Yeah.
bit more hand-holding at the beginning, but once people get into norms and into a cadence, again, they want to do good work. They want to drive impact. They don't want to let their team down for the most part. And if they do, guess what? They're not as productive as you think they are in the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
So it's, again, I think it's definitely a mindset shift. I think the challenge is that so many of us who have been in the workplace since, the fax machine was the latest technology are not kind of evolving our mindset with technology actually can really enable us to work differently now.
Mhm.
So there's a bit of a collide of people who have experiences that they're living from and imposing on others, that we need more of a growth mindset all around.
Yeah, so true. So true. So I want to circle back on the technology, but Grant threw a question in there and I want to kind of get to that. So Grant's asking, can other factors affect employee productivity / conformance? Example, manager with people skills, supportive work environment, etc.
Yes. So they're all factors that, don't go away with this pandemic and don't go away in 3.0. And I think, line to your line of questioning, it's about what are those skills and what are those factors that we're looking at in terms of an environment, in terms of leadership skills. And they are evolving with time, and that's okay, right? It's okay that there were a million books written about X, and now actually the thinking is changing and it's more like Y. And it could be a combination of X and Y. So I think, again, the ticket here is the flexibility, the hybrid, the openness to ideas. Again, back to growth mindset, just being open to the fact that just because it worked really well back then doesn't mean it doesn't deserve to evolve over time and with learnings that we've gotten through this pandemic. Does that
Yeah,
answer the question, Grant?
I thought that was a great answer. I mean, I think the thing that I have noticed and observed when I look at the leaders that seem to make the transition okay to the ones that really, really struggled, I think it comes down to two things. How clear are you as a leader at setting expectations? If you are not good at setting expectations with your people, how do you expect them to be productive? And then the second, closely tied to that, is feedback. Like, if you are not good at giving feedback and letting people know when and how they've met your expectations, that's when I see the things kick in around, well, we need to have a meeting for this. I need everybody on this meeting. Da, 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 da. It's like, okay, step back. And I am continuously, I think, amazed at how few people actually are clear on what their boss's expectations are of from them. Like, we're always asking, like, what are your top 3 deliverables this year? People get either this most tactical thing that I'm like, that is not really the deliverable. That's a tactic that's sitting like 10 layers below something, but they don't really understand. So what happens is they get all these tactics and then they get overwhelmed because they can't big picture it back to the core deliverable, which then would say, well, you know what? That was a tactic, but like, it doesn't make sense anymore, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of that churn, like what I'm noticing is just a lot of that churn happening. And if you're not good at like, to me, if I boiled it down into 2 core behaviors, it's like, really be good at setting expectations and deliver feedback more clearly.
Mhm. And communication, right? Constant
Yeah.
communication. And it's not about you, it's not personal, it's about the work and making sure that you're not spinning your wheels. And who wants
Yeah.
to sit there spinning their wheels? So true.
Yeah. Okay. So now the questions are coming in fast and furious. So I love this one. Amy is asking, to the point of all or nothing, I expect that it will be a much more hybrid between virtual and in office. What do you think the challenges will be to continue to breed collaboration across all teams? Boy, I'm hearing this a lot. Like, I'm hearing a lot of and I have a CEO who's very committed to getting the team back in the office. And their big concern is the lack of collaboration. They're worried about losing the culture and losing the collaboration that happens, all those water cooler talks and the informal chats in the lunchroom. So what's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's 2 things. I think number 1 is the collaboration piece, which, number 1, we have done a not bad job at collaborating, and we're not fully up to speed and fully productive on the tools that we have at our disposal.
Mhm.
So we were talking about technology before. There are some great tools that exist. So again, how can we, instead of doing analog to digital and the same meetings, the same amount of time, the same no agenda, the same, lack of outcomes at the end, how can we take that and really create an optimal experience where people are collaborating. So one example is, I've used a tool called Miro. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but that is a platform that you can go and collaborate off hours, right? It's basically a big whiteboard.
Like a whiteboard,
But if you're working with people outside of time zones, this is actually like a plug for, it's great to collaborate virtually because there's a bunch of people who are sitting in different time zones, more and more, who need to collaborate and shouldn't be on 10 p.m. calls in order to make that happen.
Yeah.
So, better using those collaboration tools, I think, is a huge aspect of it. Small tactics like making sure every meeting is set up as a Teams meeting first and foremost, or a Zoom meeting first and foremost, not having people kind of, emailing people 2 seconds before the meeting saying, what's the dial in? Like those days should be over. And then the other thing is making sure that if there is something, there are things that are better done in person. It's just making very deliberate choices about what those things are and structuring days and weeks and months around making those things happen, as opposed to assuming that everybody's in the office every day. So again, like just being very deliberate about what are we using our office space for? What are the meetings that need to happen in person? It's similar to before the pandemic. I mean, I don't know about you, but we had to reserve like conference rooms months in advance. We needed to know like when we needed the big conference rooms in order to have our meetings because there was competition for the conference rooms.
Yeah.
So it's being deliberate about what are those meetings that need in-person collaboration, and how do we think about those in the context of broader work. Then there's the informal water cooler type of conversation, which I have heard it's bubbling up as a bit of an issue of like sidebar water cooler conversation that nobody sees now, right? So it kind of becomes this like backdoor,
Pocket veto.
and it's like one-on-one water cooler conversation as opposed to everyone kind of being in the cafe and overhearing each other and serendipitous connections and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that is something, again, that there are technologies that can be used, but you can throw a million technologies at people. If their mindset isn't there and it's not in the flow of their work, they're not going to use it. And Glain, you and I spoke about a couple of different collaboration tools that we've heard of and seen that are great tools, right? Like you can approach someone virtually and kind of hear what they're saying and all these great things. But until we turn it from like a novel, shiny object to really integrate it into the flow of work, it's just like a cool tool that I use kind of off to the side of my desk as opposed to in the flow of work. So that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity to really, again, optimize that employee experience and optimize that hybrid collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you hit on there is so key. And that was when we were chatting in one of our pre-calls, it really kind of dawned on me. I said, I feel like organizations now, there's a new role that's emerging, which is this like super user tech person. And it really made me think, when we moved to online, we actually switched our online platform in the fall of last year. And it's a very different platform. It's very coach-like, whereas a lot of learning platforms are much more structured like a traditional training program. So we loved this one because it was a better fit for our programming. But my team, when they went to do it, like when you're saying analog to digital, in my mind, it was making me think of that because they took our analog program, which was delivered primarily face-to-face. And so there was components of it, and then basically plunked it into this. And what it really required was a big step back to say, okay, how do we push out content now? How do we present the content now? What are the elements of this platform that actually replace what we used to do as a downloadable PDF? Instead, it's in this program, right? And I kind of feel like that's a lot of organizations right now are sitting between, like to your point, we've got our digital solutions, we've got our analog way of doing things, but what we need is this integrated piece to bring them both together. And that requires somebody really stepping back and looking at the entire system. And I think I was saying to you, like, I have just such tech fatigue. Like there's so many platforms and so many things. And so I think that's what we're encountering a little bit too, isn't it? That we're just all overwhelmed already. And so now I've got to learn something else like Miro. We use Miro in our program. It's a fantastic tool. But, like we've debated when we've been working with clients on a tight timeline, oh gosh, but then we're going to have to teach them Miro. That's going to eat into the time. How do we make this efficient? There's all of these things that become these barriers until it starts to go more, until this starts really getting into the lexicon for all of us. Because I think, this stuff is here to stay. It's not like we're going to, I think Even if you went back to workplace 1.0, some of these tools would just be, way to your point, way better way of doing things. Like if you're a global company, then what we try and do now, which is put conference calls on at 6 a.m. to make sure people in Asia can be on the call or whatever it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, so true.
Okay, so we've got, again, more questions coming in, so I want to get to those. So we have somebody asking, how have you seen organizations display specific KPIs, objective outcomes, on productivity while working from home? If so, what are they? Is it like these trackers that you install on your laptop to see how much you've logged on? Because the follow-up comment here, some people are not convinced we can be productive from home, or are frustrated with the mix of some working from home, from home and front lines. So what's your thoughts on KPIs, outcomes,
Yeah,
productivity? To me, this
I mean,
sounds like a workplace culture issue that I'm hearing.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point about KPIs, I think it's up to the team to figure out what their KPIs are. Quite frankly, every time I'm on a meeting, I say, what is the outcome that we want to achieve through this work? And it's amazing how people don't think that way naturally,
Yes.
right? Like, this is the outcome we're trying to achieve. And by the way, this is why this outcome is really important for this company, because this is our purpose and this is what we've set out to do, right? Now let's discuss whether these tactics, these activities that you're performing, are actually laddering up to that outcome. You talked about deliverables line, which I think is in between the tactics and the outcomes. But really having that culture that questions, like, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve? Sometimes the answer is very well may involve tactics that can only be done in person. It may, but most of the time, it's a combination of what can be done in person and individually from home. So I always, and before the pandemic, I had these conversations with leaders. Just because someone's not in front of you doesn't mean that they're not being productive, which is an obvious no-brainer statement. But to your point, Glain, if you're not able to really articulate what are the expectations and what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, it's actually a leadership and management problem. It's not an individual contributor problem.
I agree. I mean, it's funny because often we get called in all the time to talk about leadership development programs. And that's one of my go-to questions. It's like, okay, so what's going to be different in a year? Like if your leaders are, doing something, what's going to be different? And I
Yeah.
can't tell you the number of times that stumps people. Like they
Mhm.
really have to think about it, because it's almost like, well, we know we need to do leadership development, so we should just do leadership development.
Right.
And you're
Yeah.
like, but why are we developing? Like what's the need that we're trying to, and I mean, usually it's a mindset behavior shift you're trying to make, but you still have to really anchor in, what's it going to look, how is this going to look differently 12 months from now? Then what are
Yeah.
your leaders saying? What are they doing that's going to be different than what they're doing right now? But
Yeah.
it is a question that really holds people for pause. So you can take that on a micro level or on a macro level around, what you're being asked to do in the organization. I love that idea of, yeah, teams need to really own their own KPIs and get clear on what they are
Yeah.
first. All right. So another question coming in from Anne. She's asking about leadership development. There are many leaders that are unclear on how to manage an agile workforce. What recommendations would you give leaders?
So, there's big agile and there's big A agile and there's little A agile, right? So agile is a methodology that I cannot profess to be the expert in and requires, lots of learning and training. Then there's the little A agile, and that's all about thinking about, again, how can I get this piece of work done in the most effective and efficient way possible? Now, in a big bureaucratic, hierarchical, siloed organization, it's very difficult to actually implement what the answer would be, because the answer would be, okay, I'll take that person from that team and that person from that team and that person from the gig workforce, right? And I'll bring them all together and they will do this work and they will achieve their goals, right? So I think, again, it comes back to mindset, and it comes back to organizational mindset around talent and skills being kind of an enterprise resource, as opposed to, okay, I have this many people who, by the way, all have the same skill set in my team, and I'm going to go get this work done in an agile way. I mean, you can, right? You can build your project timeline in a different way and make sure you're not waiting for, step A to be complete before step B, and kind of, incorporate some of that. But without kind of the breadth of skills and talent that you have in your organization, it's not optimized, I would say.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think that mindset piece, I mean, we keep coming back to it, but it is so huge. Like the years that I've spent like in this work of leadership, I just really come to the conclusion that, you know what, it's about self-insight. Like if you have to be relentless about pursuing self-insight as a leader, because your biases, your preferred ways of working, all of those things, what you're fixed on, and it's continuous work. It's
Yeah.
continuous work. So,
Really, I think it's continuing to ask the question, am I doing this in the most productive way possible?
yeah,
And why do I need to make any changes? Like,
yeah,
why do I need to change the way I'm working right now?
yeah,
In the agile, example, it's because I don't have the skills required to get this done in the most effective and efficient way possible, in the speed that I required to get done, right?
mhm,
If you can't get there as a leader and say, there's got to be a better way, we're keeping
mhm.
it real and there's got to be a better way, you're going to be stuck in your own ways, right? You're always going to think that your past successes are just the ways you just have to continue working.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that really strikes me as we're chatting is that you really have to have, I mean, I call it with my clients the big rocks, right? And it's what you talked about earlier, this idea of, um, and I'll use like a very simple example, meetings, big rock meetings, right? So I have an annual strategy meeting, I have quarterly strategy review meetings, I have monthly operational meetings, and I have weekly stand-up meetings. Those big rocks are in my calendar every year. Everybody knows about them. They're booked in advance. We know what the focus is going to be. Everything drives around that then, right? And then in between that, we put in like our marketing meetings, our program design meetings, whatever else we need, one-with-ones for career conversations, all of that kind of stuff. But I think there's a lot of times where we as leaders get so caught in the minutia that we're not stepping back and then really looking at what do we need to have in place as our core foundation in order to be able to be agile ourselves in the moment, right? Like too often those big rock pieces try and get inserted in, or they're not inserted at all. Like I'm amazed at the number of people who don't have quarterly planning reviews. I mean, they have a strat plan once a year and then they don't do anything else with it. And it's
Yeah.
like, how do you things change, they're so dynamic all the time, we've got to constantly be relooking, right? So I think a lot of it too for ourselves as leaders is how do you make sure that you're putting in the right foundation in place in order to allow yourself to pivot and because I was reading agility too and I was thinking I read it in another way as well, which is this agility around meeting the needs of every individual on our team, right? Like like that requires a certain amount of agility, to be able to kind of meet people where they are on the regular, whether you're in the pandemic or not.
Yeah.
All right. Grant is saying, can IT play a role in streamlining effective tools and helping them be implemented more successfully? I would say hell yes to that. What is IT's role in all of this, do you think, as we are in this workplace world?
I mean, definitely getting closer to the HR team, like
Yeah.
definitely. I've seen kind of more openness from IT to be receptive to ideas from the masses, right? In terms of, okay,
Mm,
what you've just shipped out there in terms of a tool, I don't get, like, I can't use it. I don't know how to use it most effectively. I mean,
yeah.
most notably with Teams, right? Like Teams went online in a lot of organizations
Yeah.
and people use it for this. And
Yeah.
there's so much power behind Teams. And because it was just thrown in, and IT has the way of speaking sometimes, from a user centricity perspective, it's not going to be a user manual that I read through to make sure that I understand Teams. So getting closer to HR, getting closer to kind of the voice of the people, I think is critical. And
Mhm.
also, in a lot of shops, IT, and because they're incented this way, they have their queue and they're sticking with their queue. And you can't get things into the queue after Q1, right? Like Q1 it's set and I can't do anything with my queue. And it has to be a lot more nimble because
Yeah.
business needs change. But knowing kind of where to ask the questions in terms of whether this should slot in, into the queue or not.
Yeah.
I think is critical. So, IT owns the tools and owns the rollout of the tools, but getting closer to the voice of the employee and to HR, I think is critical, because IT is the backbone of everything now, right? Now, I mean, IT back in the day was like, they sat in their little side office and did the coding, and we didn't know what they did. And that was, now they are literally the most important aspect of the business. So, getting closer to the business and to like the HR voice, I think is really important.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I always say that to actually HR leaders, because, they'll roll out these, performance reviews or whatever. And I've had a number of folks in HR go into the line and they'll say, oh my God, now I realize why nobody ever filled out those performance reviews on time
Right.
or
Yeah.
whatever. Right? They realize how, and I think anytime you're when you're in your own silo, the best thing you can do is to get out of that and start to understand how, like, we're so integrated as a business. And I agree with you, even if you think about it, like these functionally, we functionally silo everything in the organization. And my experience working with executive teams is that's kind of how they operate.
Mhm.
Everybody sort of shows up at the table with their functional area. And, one of the big things that, executive teams have to get to is that collective collaboration, shared purpose,
Yeah.
and integration, which requires, sometimes sounds crazy, but it often requires more meetings, but shorter meetings that are more focused and more impactful versus these, time consuming big update meetings.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, because one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, seeing a lot in organizations, is this, we're in the monotony of the pandemic. Now I am feeling like, I was thinking about this today because the weather's been a bit nicer the last couple of days. Spring is in the air. It feels like moods are they're lightening up a bit. But I still have this sense that, there is this pandemic weariness that is kind of throwing a big wet blanket over everything.
Yeah.
And, I heard some startling statistics out of the US that 100% of the job losses in the US were women. Like, I found that shocking, actually, that it was women who had stepped out of the workforce or who had lost their jobs. Now we're seeing a lot of that in Canada in the services industry, like a lot of, female, led businesses, and, or frankly, people having to step home so that they can homeschool their kids. And I think, we're hearing things like it's setting the women's movement back by decades and all of that kind of stuff. So a couple of double barrel question, I guess. One is for all of us that are, as leaders, dealing with this relentless monotony, trying to keep our team members engaged. I had a panic call 2 weeks ago from one of my clients, lost 4 people on their team, young leaders who, for various reasons resigned. So there's that, this whole piece that's going on right now. And then the second, I think for women in particular, and a lot of our clients right now are really looking hard at their DE&I strategies.
Yeah.
Curious, if you've got any sort of thoughts, advice in those two camps. How do we generally retain and engage people? And then, and when we put the DE&I lens on it, is there anything in addition we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think about all the time, and not a meeting goes by where the topic doesn't come up, quite
Mhm.
frankly. So on the engagement front, I mean, I have a mantra that I've been saying since the beginning, is we are living through a pandemic trying to get stuff done,
Yeah.
right? We have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That, the expectations that we set for ourselves in 2019 are not realistic until we get back to a place where people are actually comfortable being in an office and going back to whatever business as usual evolves to. It's not going to be, all of a sudden we all feel great, but it will be an evolution, and we are seeing some start of the evolution. And as people start to migrate or be allowed to go back to an office, we will see another step of the evolution, right? So I
Mhm.
think we have to differentiate between, we are still in pandemic times. We need to be vulnerable leaders. If 4 people called me up and said, I'm resigning today, I would go deep in terms of why. Is there anything we can do to reduce your work schedule, make it different for you, have a way to support you better, right? And that is temporary. That's not forevermore. That's not let's let every employee have exactly what they want. And that's not the answer long term. But in the pandemic, and unfortunately, there are people who are going to take advantage of the system. And that exists now, it existed before, and it will exist in the future, right? But there are major mental health challenges right now. Everyone's dealing with their own struggles, and we just really have to keep the foot on the gas of empathy, as challenging as that is as leaders when you're trying to get stuff done. On the women's front, I mean, I wish I had the silver bullet answer. I really, really do. But I do think, again, the empathy part, the everyone is a human part of it is really, really key. And building that environment, I'm not going to say anything that people don't already know, but building an environment where people feel included and people feel like their voices can be heard, people feel like they can have an impact, is really key. And even though people are talking about DE&I strategy, there are still many environments that are not conducive to, never mind now pandemic times, but post-pandemic times, it's not conducive to enabling people, working mothers or anybody to have kind of that most productive way of working. So again, I think it goes back to the flexibility. People want a silver bullet. They want to say, okay, if I implement this program and teach everybody about, unconscious bias, then we're all going to change and we're all going to be inclusive. The reality is that if your metrics, if your performance evaluations, if your bonuses, if your environment, if the, water cooler conversation doesn't accommodate for people being at home and at work and in the office, not at work, but in the office, and getting work done in the most effective and efficient way possible, none of that stuff matters. So I don't know if I directly answered the question, but I wish I had a silver bullet answer.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we were on a panel. How we met was we were on a panel together. And I remember you had that mic drop moment saying to everybody, look, we're not working from home. We are working from home in a pandemic. And it is a totally different thing, right? I mean, I think I think on that note, I mean, what I've noticed, which is really interesting, and I noticed this shifting from being a full-time employee working for somebody else to starting my own business. And one of the things I really noticed was the mental shift I had to make with myself. Like if I wasn't at my desk between 9 and 5, I was feeling guilty. Like I put all this pressure on myself. So one of the things that I think about a lot is our relationship with this working 9 to 5 mentality and the fact that it shackles us, because the reality is most of us don't work 9 to 5. Most of us work from 7 to 7 or 9 to 8 or 9 to 4, and then we deal with the kids and then we're back on again from 8 to midnight or whatever it is, right? Like people are juggling their hours differently, but we still have to be present between 9 and 5. And I think it's just such a recipe for burnout. And I think if we could all start to, again, we're back to this mindset shift, but if you really start thinking about what do I have to accomplish today? And like yesterday I had 4 things that I really need to accomplish. I was done all of them by 2. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what else and then I thought, you know what? I've had 2 weeks of back to back crazy town time. I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to do my jigsaw puzzle. And that's what I'm going to do until I have to make dinner. But giving myself permission to do that was crazy. We are so conditioned in this time and presenteeism mindset. And so then therefore, I always loved Tony Schwartz's work around energy management, right? And he wrote that article many, many years ago called The Corporate Athlete. The athletes don't train 24/7. They take breaks. They have to replenish. And yet we're sort of on this hamster wheel, right? So I think just giving ourselves compassion for ourselves, compassion for the people around us, but also a mindset shift around, hey, again, it goes back, circling back. What are the results that need to be done? When and how do you do them? And then do that over the course of the time that makes sense for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, do accommodate for, listen, you get emails of unexpected stuff that comes up, right? But how many of us, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but like personally, like if an email comes in, even if I'm in my bed, like I'm back to my computer.
Yeah,
And whether that's good or not is
it's not good news.
whatever.
It's not
But
good.
But like the whole fallacy that I have to be at my computer from 9 till 5, or there's FOMO, like I'm going to miss something
Yeah,
critical, is
yeah,
ludicrous. And we've all been conditioned, and we've conditioned each other to
yes.
expect a response within 2 seconds, or sorry for the delay. Last week, I sent an email back to someone and I was going to say, sorry for the delay. And then I looked at when they sent me the email, and it was literally the night before. And I was like, no, I'm not going to apologize, sorry for the delay. I'm
Yeah,
not going to do that anymore,
yeah,
because we've all built up this expectation that we have to get back to each other within seconds, right? But like, there's got to be some give and take. We have the flexibility afforded to us with this technology. We've got to be able to take that flexibility too. I block an hour during my calendar every day. I look to see when I can get in my workout, when I can get in my walk, when I can go pick up the kids. It's blocked in my calendar, so nobody can block those times.
yeah.
And it's crucial to kind of build that into your regular cadence, because I know that I'm going to be answering an email at 7 or 8 o'clock after I fed the kids. So, there's got to be give and take there.
I think so too. And I think you have to have those conversations candidly internally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I made so many assumptions when I look back. I made so many assumptions about what I could and couldn't do based on what I saw everybody else around me doing. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we get into this kind of sort of sheep mentality. And I think for the most part, people want to go in and do good work. And I think as managers, most of us that have decided to step into a management role, when I ask all of our people, like, in our programs, what do you get out of leadership? What's your favorite part? I would say 9 times out of 10, it's like helping people succeed, seeing people succeed, helping people, achieve their goals. Okay, well, if that's the mindset of most managers, then what's the risk of having a conversation that's around, hey, you know what, between 10 and 11 in the mornings, I want to attend this mommy parenting group thing. Is
Yeah.
that going to cause any issues? Can I do that? But we just don't go there, right? Like we immediately assume we can't do that. And so instead we're going to either miss out on that or have to work the weekend in order to be able to accommodate taking a day off to do that. You know what I mean? Like we just make so many false assumptions, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So Grant's asking on the future of organizations, will implementing more sustainable strategies become the future? Example, more social and environmental consciousness, etc. Yeah. Like what are you seeing in the companies that you're working with around their move towards some of those more social kind of positions and
Yeah.
how's it changing work?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a trend. It's definitely one of those macro trends that I talk about, and that's out there. And I kind of frame it under employee expectations. Like employees don't only expect the company that they join to provide good salary and benefits, which is the way it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
But they expect that the company stands for something, right?
Yes.
And they expect that the company holds true to their purpose and that they prove it by giving back to the broader world. And I just saw an interesting example this morning. Krispy Kreme donuts, I don't think it's in Canada, unfortunately, but they just announced that they will offer a free donut to everybody who comes in and shows their vaccination card. So really
Mm,
thinking through, like, what is my purpose? What am I benefiting from as a company? And how can I amplify greater good by staying true to, like, that fits perfectly with their purpose. It fits perfectly with their brand. It's a great marketing strategy. But how can I take like the fact that I sell donuts and really like contribute to the greater good? I think is definitely a big trend. I mean, we've seen, financial institutions saying they're not going to invest in funds unless there's some, environmental sustainability or diversity kind of play to the funds that they're investing in. So it's definitely a big trend, and a big trend on the employee front in terms of joining companies that do contribute to the greater good.
yeah, I think so, right? And I think, more and more certainly research is showing that more and more millennials and younger, it's a really big, I look at my daughter's 17. She is way more socially conscious. Like, I call her the social justice warrior for many reasons. She should be a lawyer, let me tell you. But just yeah, a lot of organizations are going to have to be prepared to answer those questions, and how does that fit into their overall strategy as they move forward. That makes me think about like, as you think about, the new workers that are coming into the organization, are there any big things that you're noticing with younger employees in terms of expectations for work outside of this piece? Are there other things that you notice a shift in terms of how younger employees what are they valuing and what are they looking for in workplaces these days?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the corporate social responsibility piece is huge. I think kind of the work-life flexibility continues to be, a trend. Personally, when I was first entering the workplace, that was a topic for working moms. Now it's a topic for everybody, which we've seen for the past, couple of probably decade or so, kind of broadening that conversation and really wanting to drive impact and really wanting to kind of get experience early on and feel where they're making an impact, which kind of speaks to the like knowing what your purpose is, knowing what you're doing to drive your purpose, knowing what so they want context, right? So even if they're working on this one little spreadsheet in a corner, they want context to know that they're contributing to the greater good. On the leadership front, I think it'll be really interesting to see that the kind of early stage leaders that are just emerging now, what they will become, right? Having their formative year and a half in this situation, I think will be really interesting. So I actually wrote a Globe and Mail column on it this week or last week, but really thinking through kind of those milestone rites of passage that have been canceled and what has replaced that as a result, and really going through the leadership training of a lifetime, right now. They're being thrown in the deep end. Yeah. Even the senior most leaders don't have any of the answers. Does that breed a generation of leaders that truly cares about their team's well-being and success in the future? I think it'll be really interesting to watch this generation of leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have a research partner that we work with really closely, and they look at leadership behaviors and also motivations of different generations. And it's interesting because the younger leaders that have completed this energy audit, they are far more collaborative in their leadership approach, which is not what we're used to seeing in organizations. And so I think it is really going to upend what we I think we're going to be at a friction point where we're so used to, whether you want to say, like I'm Gen X, I don't know. I feel like I've got a foot in command and control and a foot in more collaborative leadership. Like it's a bit of a balance, and I have an expectation around how I think people need to step up and take ownership if they're a leader, and accountability. Whereas this group doesn't have the same amount of energy for that. And so takes much more of a team-based approach, which for me, I'm going to speak really candidly here, it just feels less efficient. Like it feels like, come on, like make a decision, let's go, right? And so I think organizations are going to be in an interesting point, because what I'm starting to notice is we're using these tools and our leaders in our programs are getting younger and younger and younger. You start to see this energy pattern starting to go down. And when I hear the feedback they get from their bosses, a lot, it's like, well, they need to take, more of the reins or step up a little bit more. Like, can't tell you the number of leaders that I'm coaching right now that their big opportunity is what would be described as like executive presence or management focus, or, bringing that voice to the table. And yet I'm thinking, I don't know. I think we're starting to see a little bit of like my expectation, what I think good leadership is versus the next generation's approach to leadership. So yeah, I think the pandemic's going to be interesting. I think it's going to add another layer to this, right?
Yeah.
Adding up that, bringing up, because I think they're already a little bit more on the compassion side than Gen X. We were all about ourselves, right? That's like the bitter generation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I've had experience, on the leadership front with some millennial leaders, and yes, it's important for collaboration, but it's also deeply important to have clarity, right?
Yes.
So the leader still has to provide that clarity of what the outcome is and really have a point of view of which skill combination on the team is best suited to
Yeah.
do that, as
Yeah.
opposed to who wants to put their hand up to do this, right? There
Yeah.
should be some, it's not that you're not being collaborative if you're saying, okay, you do this and you do that and you do that. If anybody has any issues, let me know.
Yeah.
But I do think like clarity is really critical for speed. So if
Mhm.
speed is, if you want to get things done efficiently, there needs to be some point of view on clarity. So I think that's the piece that that sometimes is missing in kind of that collaborative leadership approach. Okay, well, who's making the final call here, right? What
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
our intended outcome?
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. Okay, well, I can't believe we are at the top of the hour already. So I'm going to ask you as we wrap up, Naomi, to just to give us like one last word of advice for all of us who are leading. What can we do to kind of get a jump start on coming out of this pandemic and set ourselves up for success? What would you
Wow.
leave us with? Your one big mic drop moment nugget for all
Oh,
of us.
that's a very, very loaded question. But I would say, hybrid flexibility is the key, and really approaching leadership from a user-centric perspective, an employee-centric perspective. That's not to say that you need to be everything, like different things to every single person. But, at the end of the day, if you're going to create an environment where individuals are able to take accountability and ownership of how they get their work done,
Mhm.
it will end up being a win-win. And for those who don't thrive in that environment, may need a little bit more direction or may just not be a fit for what you're trying to achieve. So I don't know if that's a mic drop moment, but that's what I've been thinking a lot about, is kind of how does that flexibility create a win, not just for us as employees or leaders, but for the entire organization. How can we do better and meet our strategy better by enabling a more flexible approach?
Yeah, and I think the thing that I've been thinking a lot about needing to shift leadership from being like this siloed activity to a collective activity. I mean, that's what we do at the roundtable. But I think about that in terms of then how we manage, like make it a collective activity. And to your point, it doesn't mean that we all come to consensus about what's going to happen. But I see a lot of leaders sort of take this burden, I've got to figure this all out on my own, versus how do we together, what's our plan together, everybody, and not be, and that requires leaders to be a little bit vulnerable, because you have to say, I don't really know the best way to do this, but guys, can we figure it out?
Yeah.
What can we do to figure this out? And I'm struggling with how I can be flexible with everybody. What do you guys think would work? Right? Like I think too often, like, we get taken we drink the Kool-Aid of leaders need to be all knowing, and it's like, oh my gosh, can we let go of that
Yeah.
expectation on ourselves,
Yeah,
right?
I think we've proven that through this
Yeah.
pandemic that nobody answered.
Can't do it alone.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, Naomi, thank you so, so much for being here. Everybody on the call, I am going to be doing my top 3 takeaways from this. We'll send out the recording. I will make sure you have ways to connect with Naomi directly so that you can, reach out to her if you want to learn more about her amazing work and the work that she does with organizations. It would be, I can recommend working with her enough. I just always enjoy my conversation. I always walk away learning something new. So Naomi, thank you so much for being with us.
thanks so much for having me, Glain. Always a pleasure.
And for those of you who don't know much about us, we are a group coaching company. If you would like to learn more about our programs, reach out to me. We are all about agile learning in the moment, bespoke learning. So I feel like I've been doing that for 13 years before a pandemic. In terms of our, Kenzie, if you want to keep moving the slides forward, that'd be great. Okay. Is now sold out. So this slide will be removed for the next one. If you want to start your own grassroots leadership revolution, you can buy my book and learn how to create your own DIY peer group to support you in your learning. And then last but not least, our next session coming up next month is with my friend Maria Brown, who is the head of research for our management partner, our research partner at Management Research Group. And we are going to talk about the fact, and it's funny because we've been talking about that a little bit today, this idea of people and results. And guess what? We're probably on this call, most of us are doing it wrong. So Maria is going to share with us some of the research around why is it so hard for leaders to balance that effectively. So look forward to having you rejoin us next month, and have a great rest of whatever month we're in now, March. I'm in pandemic Groundhog Day, and we'll see you in April. Thanks, everybody. Bye.